Hey everyone, and welcome to the All It Takes is a Goal podcast, the best place in the entire world, including all of Canada, to learn how to build new thoughts, new actions, and new results. I'm your host, Jon Acuff, and today I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome. Why am I talking about that specifically? Because I'm at the beginning of the 3-year book writing process. So I'm working on a new book, and it's the very beginning of the process for me. And the first thing I do when I start working on a new book is I try to find a question that won't leave me alone. Something that I want to spend years answering and then decades talking about. That's the thing. When you write a nonfiction book, you're going to talk about it for a long time. You're going to write about it for a long time. It better hinge on something you're deeply passionate about. So for instance, I wrote this book called Finish. And my main question with Finish was, can I go from being a chronic starter into a consistent finisher? I was amazing at starting. I started 1,000 things. I have all these domains on GoDaddy. I have started book ideas, have written in notebooks, have started exercise plans. I was a chronic starter. Could I learn how to be a consistent finisher? And that launched me on the research, that launched me on the project. With soundtracks, my question was, can I turn overthinking, I'm an overthinker, can I turn overthinking from a super problem into a superpower? Are there things I can do to learn how to really make overthinking work for me, not against me? And with this new book, the question I'm curious about right now, the question I'm kicking around, if you will, is bravery a trait or a skill? That is it something you're born with? Like there's brave people that are born and there's people who aren't brave. Or is it a skill you can actually learn? Are there specific things you can do to become braver? And if so, how do we, you and I, how do we master bravery? Now, why am I curious about bravery? Why is that what I'm going to work on, study, figure out, research, test, experiment, all the words? Why am I curious about that? Here's why. Because every goal you want to achieve is on the other side of a brave decision. This podcast is called All It Takes is a Goal, and bravery is such a big part of your goal. The people who accomplish the most aren't the smartest. The people who change the world aren't the most innovative. The people who build empires aren't the most creative. The people who rewrite history and revolutionize entire industries are never the most talented, most networked, or even the richest, but they all share one trait in common. Each was the bravest person in the room. And right now you're thinking of somebody. There's probably somebody in your life right now you're thinking of that you say, wow, they had so many opportunities, or they're so smart, they're so talented. I was talking to a photographer about that today. Successful photographer, built a career, amazing career, building a house in Mexico right now so he can windsurf more, just super successful guy. And we were talking about how many of his friends who were even more talented than him, more creative, don't have the type of career he has. And you see that all the time. I live in Nashville. I know really, really talented musicians who are never able to put it together, who are never able to have a long-term career. They're never able to take that goal of being a full-time musician and make it work. And I'm not saying get a hit. You don't control get a hit. You don't control some famous person hearing your song in a bar and putting you on a rocket ride. You don't control like getting a hit, but you do control figuring out how to turn your craft, your goal, into something that's successful, something that's sustainable. But it requires bravery. And it's taken me nearly 50 years. Like, can you believe that? I'm almost like, I'm not about to be 50. I don't want to exaggerate. I mean, I do want to exaggerate. It's a podcast. You got to exaggerate a little bit, keep it exciting, dynamic. But I'm approaching 50, and it's taken me so long to realize that every win, every triumph, every small victory that I've ever had happened because I chose bravery. And I built a boat that could weather my fears, and I built a boat that could weather the challenges and the storms. And you might not feel brave right now, like maybe even hearing that word, you're like, ooh, I'm not brave. But that's fine, because I genuinely believe that bravery is one of the most learnable skills in the universe. Again, I'm at the start of this process, but I can already tell from the research that you can learn how to be brave, and there's some specific things you can do. So Over the next 3 years, I'm going to do a ton of research. I'm going to figure out how can you become braver? What does it take? What are some simple tools? In the same way that with all my books, I like to take a complex subject like mindset. That's what Soundtracks is really about. It's a mindset book. But when you talk about mindset, it gets so fuzzy and holistic right away. And so I tried to simplify that down and go, here's some practical, tactical things you can do on a Tuesday when your mindset isn't where you want it to be to have a better mindset. And so I'm going to spend the next 3 years working on that idea. And one of the things I'm going to do as part of that process is teach content. I love to do online challenges. So what's an online challenge? Well, a friend of mine named Pedro taught me how to do them. And I've done probably 6 or 7 at this point with tens of thousands of people around the world. And here's how they work. They're really super duper simple. You launch a free challenge. Usually 5 days. Some people do 3 days. I like 5 days. And then for an hour every day that week, you do an online teaching. You do an online lesson. And I love it. I love putting together content. I love teaching. I love the back and forth. I get to learn from other people. And so I'm going to do one called 5 Brave Days. It starts on September 26th. And again, 100% free. If you're curious, just go to acuff.me/challenge, acuff.me/challenge. We had 10,000 people take the last one. I think we'll probably have 10,000 other people take this one. And again, you teach lessons. I go on and it's usually at noon Central Time, Shadow Central Time, most unforgotten. Well, no, Mountain Time. Mountain Time is the most disrespected time zone in America. If you're listening from like Bulgaria, here in America, nobody cares about Mountain Time. Now they get to have mountains and skiing, so it's nice, but ultimately nobody plans TV shows around Mountain Time. It's Eastern and it's Pacific. And then Central is kind of forgotten. But yeah, so I go on at like 12 and I teach for an hour. And I would say a lot of people aren't able to attend live because they have like jobs and stuff and like taxes and like kids. So we do video replays. So you sign up, it's free. I teach 5 days in a row and we send you video replays so you can watch them at home. They're on different topics. I did one on overcoming overthinking. I did one called the Beyond Perfect Challenge about perfectionism. This one's going to be about bravery. And every time we do a challenge, it's so fun because people show up skeptical, and they should be. You should be skeptical. I just did an event the other day in Utah, and a guy came up after and he said, no offense, I walked in here real doubtful because I saw motivational speaker on your title. And I was like, oh, this guy. And I get it. There's some terrible motivational content out there. There is one of my favorite, dumbest motivational things. I see this on Instagram all the time. It'll be like, sometimes you have to jump off the cliff and grow wings on the way down. And I always think, that's not how gravity works, dude. That is never how gravity works. But people show up to these challenges and they're skeptical. And the reason they're skeptical is there's a billion online challenges right now. There are people, for instance, who have been married for like an hour. Like they've been married for an hour and they're selling a course or an online lesson or a masterclass on how to have an amazing marriage. Dude, if I can smell the sunscreen from your honeymoon on you still, don't sell me a marriage course online. So I love that people come to my courses skeptical because they're not expecting a ton of information or a ton of content. And then I just get to turn on this fire hose of content that I've spent the last 24 years building. Like, which is crazy to me to say. Again, like you look up one day and you've been in the industry for almost a quarter of a century. Like I graduated from college in 1998, which is nuts to me. With an advertising degree, I've been a professional writer for 24 years. And so I love to be able to pull all of that together and share it in a free online event. It's super fun for me. And the community is nuts. That's the other thing. There are 17,000 people from around the world in my challenge group that have taken these challenges with me. Like, remember when the internet was nice? Or remember when like Twitter was nice for those first 10 minutes? Like when Twitter came out and people were like, I like chocolate. And somebody else would be like, I like chocolate too. Woo. The internet was nice for like 10 minutes. This is what this community feels like. It's a private group, 17,000 people, and it's the most encouraging go-getters you've ever met in your life. And when you do the challenge, we put you in the group and you get to meet a bunch of people. And what's fun for me is that often when you read my books, you'll see those stories from those people in those books. Like Soundtracks had 36 real stories from real people that had worked on the content with me. I have another book coming out next fall. There's 55 real stories in it. And what's helped me as a writer is Now, when I write a book, it's not just, hey, I've had some ideas in my little office outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and I hope they help. Now it's a bigger story. Now you can read it and go, oh, here's how a single mom applied Jon's book and the concepts in it. Here's how a retiree from Savannah, Georgia did it. It's a much broader story than just my very narrow one-person definition. I've opened up the content to get real feedback, real suggestions, real stories, so that by the time the book comes out, there's real life baked in and a lot of people can identify with it. That's changed my ability to write books that are helpful for people, is that you help me write them. I have real people in real communities that try this content with me. And that's what I'm going to do. Again, starting Monday, September 26th, I'm going to do 5 days of free live training. If you're interested, it's acuff.me/challenge. acuff.me/challenge. So what are you going to learn? Here's how I'm going to break down the content. Here's how I'm thinking about bravery as a concept right now. There's 5 things I want to talk about. Number 1, on Monday, I'll teach you how to master the 3 keys of bravery. I think there's 3 specific things that kind of unlock the lock that is bravery. On Tuesday, I'll show you the 5 tools you need to add to your bravery toolbox. I've got this concept of like, if you had a bravery toolbox that you could carry into every day, what tools would you put into it? Like, how would you be deliberately brave? On Wednesday, I'm going to talk about how to tap into bravery's secret weapon, which I think is compassion. I think compassion matters so much when it comes to bravery, and we often don't talk about it. On Thursday, you'll discover how to beat imposter syndrome. And then on Friday, I'll teach you the 10 thoughts that you can use to choose bravery every day. Because that's what I believe. What I believe is that bravery is a choice, not a feeling. You can't wait until you feel brave enough to do that thing you've always wanted to do. You have to choose bravery. So speaking of Thursday, I mentioned Thursday's content is going to be imposter syndrome. I want to give you a little sneak peek about what I'm going to be teaching about, what I'm going to be talking about. Now, why did I pick imposter syndrome specifically? I picked it because I think it wrecks more dreams than just about anything else. I see people talk about imposter syndrome. See people think about it, get stuck with it. And so I want to go ahead and address it. And I like to address things by first defining them, because then we have like a shared common understanding that we can actually work with. So here's how I would define imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is the fear of being found out. Let me repeat that. Imposter syndrome is the fear of being found out. It's the concern that people are going to discover you're not who you say you are. You're a poser. You're a fraud. And unless you stay one step ahead of everyone, you'll be found out. There's this sense of, I'm going to get caught. Somebody's going to go, wait a second. This isn't really who we thought it was. That's what imposter syndrome is. It's the fear of being found out. So what would happen if you're found out? Well, what would happen is you'd be judged. Like, people would judge you. Friends, coworkers, neighbors, family members, they would judge you. They'd look at you and see that you're a phony, and they would judge you for that. So then pull the thread a little further, because that's one of my techniques. I love to pull the thread, like, okay, what's the thought behind the thought, or what's the problem behind the problem? So the fear is you're going to be found out. And what you're afraid of is, if you're found out, you'll be judged. And now, if you're judged, what will happen? What's the next step? Well, what will happen is you'll get ostracized. You'll get ostracized. You'll get kicked out of the club. You'll be fired from the company. You'll lose your opportunity. Maybe you'll be booted from the family or the friend group, or the circle. Maybe it's the lunch table. Maybe in high school you have to go sit outside by yourself because you lost your spot at the lunch table. What's interesting about being an adult is that there's lunch tables everywhere. Like, high school isn't when they end. There's little circles. There's little lunch tables your entire life. So simply put, imposter syndrome has 3 steps. Number 1, you're found out. Number 2, you're labeled. And number 3, you're rejected. You're found out, you're labeled, you're rejected. That's what we're afraid of. Now, in response, we tend to do one of 3 things. Now, as I share these things, I want you to be thinking about, okay, which one of these do I identify with? Like, which one do I go, ooh, he's right, I do that. I did that last week. When we're afraid of imposter syndrome, we do one of 3 things. Number 1, we strive. We strive. If we can stay ahead of the invisible jury that's about to convict us at any given moment, we can make it. We just have to keep hustling. We have to keep straining. We have to keep performing at such a high level that no one will ever question whether we really belong. Now, this is an exhausting way to live. That sense of, I've got to strive, because I don't want to be found out. There's a huge difference between hustling on a goal, working on a goal out of joy versus striving. I remember I talked to a guy named Brad Montague. Brad Montague, a lot of you might know him. He's written a ton of books. He's a brilliant creative guy. He created this concept called Kid President. Do you remember that from a few years ago, Kid President? It was super successful. And they got to meet the president of the United States. They got to meet Beyonce. It was this huge, huge thing. And so I asked him once, how do you do the next project after that? Like when you've had a success, how do you do the next project after that? And he said something to me I've never forgotten. He said, Jon, for me, like he knows when he's striving the wrong way with this really simple test. He said, am I creating from love or for love? Am I creating from love or for love? So from love is I've got this thing that I'm dying to get out. Like I've got to share this with the world. I'm going to burst if I don't. It could be starting a business. It could be writing a book. It could be having a podcast. It could be becoming a public speaker, whatever. You've got this idea and you've got to create this thing. It could be painting. It could be making crafts. It could be a million things. You've got something and you love it so much and you create from that love. He said, that's one way. The other way is for love. For love is when you create something hoping that you'll get love in return. And you create something hoping that people will adore you, hoping that people will affirm you, hoping that people will validate you, hoping that people will tell you you're good at whatever it is you do. And he said, I know there's a big difference between those two things. And so I'm constantly saying and kind of keeping a check, am I creating from love or for love? And I love that differentiation. I think that's good for all of us to remember, okay, am I creating from a place of like, it's something I love and I'm sharing it with the world, or I'm creating from a place of I need the world to love me, and so I'm going to create this thing. They're very different experiences. So when you're striving, I would argue that you're often trying to create for love, for identity, for affirmation, for validation. You're asking the world to tell you something versus telling the world something. So first response to imposter syndrome, we strive. Second response, we hide. We hide. If we can't strive and perform, we hide and pretend. Let me say that again. If we can't strive and perform, we hide and pretend. In this approach, we put more emphasis on our appearance than our performance. And hide doesn't mean we create a fake version of ourselves that has it all together. It can mean that. I mean, social media thrives on that, doesn't it? This ability to create a certain way that your life looks. It offers you lots of hiding spaces. It's kind of this sense of, if I can just fill the Instagram square, like this little tiny square with just the best parts of my life, maybe people will think I have a perfect life. And hiding can look that way. But hiding can also look like putting on a tough exterior. Some people use apathy to hide. Apathy is a shield. It's this sense of saying, I don't care, doesn't even matter to me, I didn't want that anyway, what's the point? They use apathy to protect themselves from caring, because if they care too much, they might be found out and they might get hurt. Some people use anger or sarcasm to hide. That was me in college. I was so insecure, but I didn't want anyone to know that. So I created this tough. And when I say tough, I clearly don't mean like, no one's ever been awed at my physical toughness. I tried to get people to say, instead of Jon Acuff, Jon A Tough in like middle school. I tried to get that nickname going. A Tough did not take. You really can't create your own nickname. It never works that way. But when I say tough exterior, I mean, I had this kind of, I'm a Yankee at a Southern school. I came down from Massachusetts. I went to a Catholic all-boys high school. I came down from Massachusetts down to the South, and I was like, oh, what is the South? Like I had this tough exterior to hide all my insecurity. I was smug and cocky and angry, but underneath all of that, I was just hiding. Like if you ever see my photo from like my student ID, you're like, that is the cockiest, biggest jerk. Like when I see the photo, I'm like, ugh. But I know that student, that 19-year-old was just hiding because he was insecure. The third response to imposter syndrome is to quit. It's just a flat out quit. If you can't strive, if you can't hide, you'll just quit. Every time you sit down to write, you'll feel like you're not a real writer, so you don't write. You quit on the dream before you've even started. Every time you sit down with your business plan, you feel like, I'm not a real entrepreneur, so you push that aside. You push that dream aside for another year or two. Every time you sit down for a leadership project at work, you feel like you're not a real leader, so you pull back. Those are the three most common responses to imposter syndrome. Number one, you strive. Number two, you hide. Number three, you quit. So I want to give you a little bit of thought, because I'm going to share this idea on Thursday during the 5 Brave Days Challenge. That's hard to say. Maybe I should have named it something easier to say. 5 Brave Days Challenge. I'm going to have to really get a rhythm going. I'll break this down further then, but I'm curious, which of the three do you find yourself doing most often? Do you strive? Do you hide? Do you quit? Which of those did you resonate with? I would say that I tend to strive. If there's one that I think about now, like I definitely hid in college, but now I'm more tempted to strive. Which one do you do the most? Which one's, struck a nerve? So those are the three responses. So what do we tend to do to fix that? How do we change that? How do we address that? I'll go into a much longer answer during the challenge, but here's the spoiler alert, because we're already at like 20 minutes or so, and I try to keep these episodes kind of short and action-packed. Here's how you beat imposter syndrome. Instead of striving, check your expectations. Instead of hiding, show up. Instead of quitting, do the work. That's the path. Those are the three actions that are going to help you the most. Instead of striving, check your expectations. Instead of hiding, show up. Show up to the situation. And instead of quitting, do the work. How do we do those? Like, what are some specific tools, some specific actions? I'll teach you those next week in the challenge. If you want to sign up, it's free. It's just acuff.me/challenge, acuff.me/challenge. But I really believe that if you have any degree of imposter syndrome, and I think we all do to a degree, there's some simple things you can do. And I'm going to talk about how do we check our expectations. Like when we get into a situation and we feel imposter syndrome, maybe we feel a bit overwhelmed, maybe we feel not up to the task. How do we check our expectations in that moment? How do we show up? What does it look like for us to show up? And there's a thing you can do to remove the sting of imposter syndrome. It's almost like you can pull the teeth out of imposter syndrome if you do this thing, and it's related to showing up. And the last one, how do we do the work? How do you and I make sure that we're actually doing the work to beat imposter syndrome? Again, if you want to join the challenge, it's acuff.me/challenge, but I think it's going to be really fun. I love getting to explore these ideas with you guys, whether it's on the podcast, whether it's in a challenge, whether it's in a book. Somebody asked me the other day, like, why do I write the way I write? And they said, like, who do I write for? And I thought about that. And the reality is a big part of my writing process is I write for the me I used to be. And that's not unique to me. Sometimes I'll talk to teachers and I'll say, hey, who do you teach for? They'll say, I teach for the me I used to be. They'll say, when I was 13, my parents got a divorce and my grades plummeted and my friend group changed and I isolated and my entire personality changed. And there wasn't a teacher that noticed that. Nobody showed up. So now I'm a teacher for the me I used to be, because there's going to be another 13-year-old that goes through that situation and I want to be the one who shows up. There's a really powerful thing that happens when adults show up at important moments for teenagers. That's part of why I wrote that book, Your New Playlist. It reminds me of a situation that happened at the YMCA near our house. I spoke to a big YMCA event in Indianapolis, and I toured the YMCA in Brentwood, Tennessee, near our house before I went and spoke there. I love being able to do that, to really get to know clients, to really show up and super serve. Because one of the things that people hate, this is just a bonus public speaking tidbit, if you will, is audiences hate when they can tell you have one speech and it didn't matter who was sitting there. Like it could have been realtors from Utah. It could be Panda Express managers. It could be jewelers from Signet Jewelers. It didn't matter who was sitting there. You showed up with one speech and didn't consider the audience. So I love to do the upfront work to really get to know the audience. So I went and toured this YMCA in Brentwood, Tennessee, and they were talking to me about one of their volunteers. And he's in his like mid 70s and he volunteers in the skate park. That dude will never kickflip. Like he's in his mid 70s. He's not like an old skater that's like, he's not Tony Hawk at 75 who's like kickflipping or like doing an ollie. But one day this kid showed up, a teenager, and he seemed kind of off. He seemed kind of sullen, seemed kind of down. And the volunteer said, "Hey, what's going on? What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, I just found out my parents are getting a divorce and it's my fault." And this volunteer, this old man in his mid 70s was able to say, "No, it's not. No, it's not your fault," because that kid was in the process of picking up a broken soundtrack. That's what happens. Like we pick up these broken soundtracks when we're young, and then often we listen to them for 10, 20, 30 years. That's what to me is fun about this book I wrote with my daughters, Your New Playlist. It teaches teenagers how to build winning mindsets at a time when their mindset is really pliable and really flexible. I mean, I love working with anybody of any age. But it's amazing what happens when you teach a teenager the truth because they get to sprint with it. They don't have 2 decades of broken soundtracks to get rid of first. It's really, really fun. But people ask me, who do I write for? And I write for the me I used to be. I remember those moments where I was stuck at a job I didn't love and I was sitting in the parking lot and I was wondering, can I change my life? I'd plateaued. I'd hit a career ceiling. I was in my early 30s and I was stuck. I was just so stuck. And I remember listening to music to inspire me to go into the job, and I was doing all these things. And I remember that person in that parking lot in the dark in Atlanta, Georgia, trying to get motivated, feeling very stuck when I write. I think about the me I used to be, and I go, what would that person need? How do I slingshot that person? That's why I write. I want to slingshot you. I want to help you achieve the things you really want to achieve. I want to show you what's possible. I believe you're capable of so much more. And I want to give you the tools that'll help you get there. That's why I record this podcast. It's why I write books. That's why I do reels. It's why I do speeches. It's why I do online challenges. So if you resonate with that idea of imposter syndrome, if you're curious about, can I become braver? Like, is that something like, and maybe the last 2 years, you're thinking like, ooh, I could use a lesson on bravery because the last 2 years have been challenging. Like nobody had an easy last 2 years. Like some people did better than others. Definitely. I've talked to a number of businesses that had amazing success business-wise, but I think everybody's heart had a hard last 2 years. So if that's you, like come join the Bravery Challenge. Like let's learn together. What does it really take to be brave? What does it really take for us to choose bravery? Last time, it's www.acuff.me/challenge. Thank you so much for listening to this today. We'll put any links in the show notes as always. And thank you for reviewing the podcast. I say that every episode because I mean it. Your reviews are super helpful. They're super encouraging and they give me a sense of what's working and how to build on that. The show gets better because of your reviews. That's just the flat out truth. The show gets better because of your reviews. So thank you for taking a minute or two to write those. Please make sure you subscribe or follow or whatever it is the kids are saying these days. And please write a review. I'll be back next week. And remember, all it takes is a goal. Join me next week. We're going to start the 5 Brave Days Challenge. www.acuff.me/challenge. See you next week.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about the All It Takes Is a Goal podcast and to get access to today's show notes and exclusive content from Jon Acuff, visit acuff.me/podcast. Thanks again for joining us. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the All It Takes Is a Goal podcast.